Good afternoon, folks. This is Terry and Tom, and we're here again with the Metaphysical Mysteries. Today, we have two guests, which is unusual for us, and we're going to be talking about what I would consider to be a modern-day witch burning. In other words, what happens to people who are having mystical experiences and other psychic phenomenon, I guess I would say, and they end up in a situation that all of us would dread. And so I have with us Dr. Kathleen Tallent. She has been with us before. You can see her on the podcast. And she's going to be chiming in from the psychologist point of view and life coaching point of view. And Ed, we've got you here as the person who found himself in a dire situation, I would call it. And so maybe, and keeping in mind that Ed is a retired law enforcement and has 30 plus years experience in that field. I've known him myself for decades. And when I found out that this happened, I said, boy, this is something we need to share with the public. So, because people are constantly asking, when do I say something? When do I come out of the closet if I'm having these experiences? So, Ed, I'm going to let you kind of start and any background you want to give and kind of go from there.
Okay. Thank you, Terry, very much. I appreciate you having me on your show today.
No problem.
So I'll just, I'll tell the story in very short form. March of 2020, after a few years of having quite a few experiences myself, mystical experiences, and really opening up and awakening, I was keeping a journal. And that journal was from the standpoint of an observer. From a neutral standpoint, I would write down everything that I experienced or that someone told me, maybe an intuitive or a shaman. And I had that journal in my office in my home, and my wife and I at that time, my ex-wife now, again, this was March of 2020. I had that journal in my home, in my office. It was mine, it was my private property. Without my knowledge, she broke into it and was disturbed by what she read, although she never said a word to me about it. From that point, she went behind my back. Again, we were living in the house together, but we were, in the process of getting a divorce. And she went to the county first with an affidavit for an order of protection. And then in short, had deputies come to my house, serve me with that. And I was taken to a local psychiatric hospital. Something that she had told them, and there were at least 8 just absolute lies inside of this document that just were not true, or things she had taken out of my journal and misrepresented them. So the court system, unfortunately, in this situation, and I understand why, favors the wife, the female in the relationship. Although I have never, in 36 years of marriage, I have never touched her. I've never abused her, ever. And so anyway, she took this there. The law enforcement showed up at my house one night. She hadn't been there. Again, I knew nothing of this. Took me by surprise. I even knew one of the officers who was there because I train law enforcement still. Had just had her in a class the week before. And they had me committed to a psychiatric hospital.
Now, Ed,
unfortunately,
let me interrupt for a second. So who is it exactly that had you committed? And of course, obviously, this was against your will. So how did that background?
Yes. So what happened was she told them inside this document, inside this sworn document, that I was currently suicidal, which was a complete fabrication.
Right.
And unfortunately, law enforcement, well, they called an ambulance. I mean, I wasn't fighting anybody, of course. I was perfectly fine.
Right.
And I understood that if I were to do anything that would be violent in any nature, it would, or in any way, shape, or form, it would just make me look even worse. So I walked to the ambulance, got in it, and went there and assumed that when I went into their intake, that I would be talking to a crisis worker and that they would understand that I'm perfectly fine. Well, unfortunately, that's not what took place. She had, through this document, preloaded the whole thing with not only the hospital, not only with law enforcement and the courts, but also with my family and my children and her family. She was very quick, within moments of me going there, to send all of this documentation by email to everybody she possibly could. So there's a lot more to that story, but that's essentially what happened. From that point, I quickly realized once I was in there that I was there to pay the bills. The hospital was going to make sure that they diagnosed me with something that really couldn't be argued with, and that was bipolar. Even though none of the diagnosis was from me. She never, the physician, who was a female, never spoke to me about anything. She came in, introduced herself the first full day and said, "You're bipolar." And I, of course, disagreed. But
I love the snap judgment on your bipolar. Kathleen, yes. This is not normal, I'm assuming.
Well, no, it's not normal. It's not normal. The part about how you were hospitalized based on what somebody else reported to healthcare professionals is surprising. So I don't know all the details about how they arrived at that, but usually if someone is concerned about your well-being, you would be taken to an ER and have a full evaluation, and they would listen to you and what you had to say and kind of make their best clinical judgment from there. Yeah.
Yes. So the crisis worker that I saw in the intake of this hospital interviewed me, of course, off of a check sheet, and had all the information already from what my wife had said about me and the affidavit she had tendered to the county. I will add that when she tried to get that order of protection, the judge said that there was no abuse, and that the best he would do, he did not give her an order of protection. The best he would do is set a court date, and that court date was for 2 weeks from that day. And we did go to that court date after I got out of the hospital, and she lost. She never had an order of protection. My family was led to believe that she did. And
so, Ed, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So there was actually a judge, obviously, that had to order this done.
Yes.
Okay. And it was based on,
yes.
It was based on an affidavit your ex filed at the time. And
correct.
But there was no verification. Did they use this diary of yours as verification of her thoughts, or just randomly she just decided to have you committed, so to speak?
Well, I can quote the psychiatrist in the hospital. When I brought this up to her the very first time I met her, I said, these things never happened. And she said exactly this to me. Your ex-wife put this into an affidavit, and so I have to believe her, not you.
Oh boy.
And that was that. After a few sessions with her, well, not sessions, each day we would have 5 minutes with her. Each patient that was there would have about 5 minutes with her. She kept getting me mixed up with other patients. But nonetheless.
She's probably bipolar.
Yeah, probably. So at least attention deficit, maybe. But so midweek, I said to her, after a couple of days there, I said, "Doctor, I have a question for you." And as I was very cooperative, because I knew that I had to be cooperative. You can't be in those situations not cooperative. It just makes you look as though there's something wrong with you if you're not. So anyway, I asked her this question. I said, my understanding, after having a son who's bipolar, he's 27 now, and seeing that all of his life, I said, my understanding is that bipolar just doesn't sneak up on you when you're when you're 57 years old. It presents itself much earlier in life. And I told her I went through all of my career as a law enforcement officer and being vetted as law enforcement. If you were bipolar, in your 20s, they would probably realize that, or somewhere along the way it would come up. And she looked at me, turned away, and said nothing. The next day, she said, well, upon further examination of your history, she goes, which was my history was what my ex had told her. I believe that you have schizoaffective disorder. And I said, oh, along with bipolar? And she said, yes, you also have schizoaffective disorder. And I said, well, what's that based upon?
Okay. Yeah. Kathleen,
And she,
Kathleen, what the hell is that?
What is schizoaffective disorder?
Yeah. Tell us
Well,
what
actually,
it is.
to me, I would never diagnose both of those things together anyway, because schizoaffective disorder is having aspects of psychosis as well as aspects of mood, which would encompass that mania and or depression. So it's kind of either one or the other. You wouldn't get both diagnoses. At least I wouldn't do that.
Okay. And for the listeners out there, I'm going to recap this again. What we're talking about here is Ed, having had some mystical experiences, he recorded it from an observational point of view. This diary that he had in him was weaponized by an ex, and he has found himself in he's found himself in this, mental institution, with whatever you want to call it, and for psychological evaluation. And I'm going to tell you this, I'm going to do a personal testimony. This is the most sane, normal person that I've ever ran into in my life. And I cannot imagine the kind of situation. But, when I said modern day witch burning, this seems to me that this is all about a lack of knowledge by the doctor that was there and the judge who was part of it, a complete lack of knowledge of anything mystical or metaphysical. And there was no advocate to step in and say, hey, dipshit, this is normal if you're actually in the psychic medium work or whatever, or just observing mystical stuff. Nobody was able to step in that had any kind of leverage that could have minimized this and so forth. So I find it extremely disturbing for those out there that we speak to here on this podcast every week, that are saying, hey, I don't really want to come out of the closet because this could happen to me. So I guess I'm gonna try to ask questions of you all. What could you have done differently? What would you do differently in the future to avoid this? And for both of you, your opinions on when should you come out, how you should come out. I have opinions because I certainly counsel people on that every day. It seems like a very common thing. But Kathleen, I'm going to throw it to you first on that, and then we're going to go to Ed, the man with the plan here.
Yeah, there's several factors involved here. One of the things that I think about when I first hear just the whole experience is there's a classic study in psychology. It's from the 1970s, Rosenhan, where this group, a small group, I think it was like 8 to 10 people, they went into a mental hospital and checked themselves in intentionally as part of this research study. And they said like really minimal things, like I hear a voice, just very vague kinds of things. And they wanted to see what happened, because after they got admitted, they acted completely normal, like themselves. Just they were themselves. And they got labeled based on, like, I think one of them was writing in a book or whatever, walking around, and it would get, there was a bias toward, considering just their normal, typical behavior to be mental illness. And so that study was groundbreaking because it showed that there is a bias in the mental health field toward that. And there's a stigma toward mental illness. So that's one factor I think about right off the bat, that you lived that experiment because exactly you were fine. Happened. You were, yes, of sound mind there, but they were telling you that, you had all these diagnoses and issues.
Yes.
That's one factor.
Tommy, I was going to say, Tommy, you do this clinical work too. Have you run into this kind of thing?
Yeah, I was going to say I spent a period of time working in a state luck facility, and I can identify with what you went through. And I'm going to be probably less nice than you, Terry. I'm going to say that clinician needs to go back to school and learn how to be a clinician. Before you diagnose someone, how about have a real conversation with them instead of, reading someone else's affidavit? That should be a place to begin, but not the place to end.
Isn't this, let me throw this out before I go to Ed, but for the other two clinicians here, isn't this malpractice in some form? I mean, when we know we've got a perfectly normal person and they've been labeled with this, and I mean, there's privileges that he, lost in the process with this because of the label.
What I would say, I don't know enough of those details, like what maybe they had seen or not seen, but I would pretty safely say that it was bias. And it might be the bias in the system itself, because if somebody is, saying, and filling out an affidavit and saying that all these things happened, then at some level, the system, with people within the system, are trained, I guess, to take that seriously. So that's a problem, because the other angle to this that's an issue is that this was clearly an attack. So after you've had this awakening, all these experiences, then for various reasons, the motives maybe were an attack. So it becomes very, I think it is a cautionary tale to try to kind of pick this apart and try to help others understand what to do if they're in a similar situation. If their family or friends or someone turns against them, what do you do?
Tom, you have anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. I mean, I think back to the first time you and I shared what we did. And how long had we known each other before we took that risk, despite the relationship we had for decades?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's very hard when you don't have those relationships with people, that depth of time and, interaction. How do you voice what you're experiencing without labeling yourself in a lot of ways?
Sure. Of course, me, I don't give a rat's ass. So, but I never have. Ask Ed, he can tell you. And so, but Ed, here's the thing. Okay, anything you would do differently? I mean, obviously, you didn't get to talk about any of these mystical experiences. It doesn't sound like with this clinician, right? You didn't get to talk.
Oh no, she never asked me anything. She just, each day when I would see her for 5 minutes, she would announce something else out of this affidavit that I had supposedly done in the past. And that was to shore up and prove that I was, in fact, bipolar and had schizoaffective disorder. Most of what was in the affidavit was not true. It may have had a sliver of fact, but yet was tweaked. And manipulated. Manipulated is the right word here. There was a great deal of manipulation in all of this. So not once did she ask me anything about me or how I felt about something. She was there to tell me what the problem was, and that it was obvious there in a 70-bed unit that I was there to pay the bill because I was insured, and there had to be something wrong with me, because if not, she had to let me go. And I can share with you one other thing that I found a little bit disturbing. It was manipulation inside the hospital. Briefly, there were two sides to this unit. There's the acute side and the general side. The acute side, of course, is where the worst of the worst cases are. Lots of noise, lots of things going on that are disturbing, especially when you're trying to sleep. On the other side is the general side, and that's where people who come in, they just had a momentary thing, they just need a few days or whatever. Maybe they're bipolar or something else. Well, from the intake on day one, they took me to the acute side because I refused to sign myself in. I refused to sign myself in, and as I'm sure you're well aware, if you don't sign yourself in, then they have to take you to court in order to get paid. They have to have you committed. And I would not sign myself in. So they kept me on that acute side for 2 days. And every couple of hours, somebody new would come in and put on the sales pitch of, if you just sign in, then you can get out of here in 5 days. If we have to take you to court, of course, it could take, well, we don't know how long it could take. It could take weeks. And I'm quoting that, it could take weeks. It's what they told me. If you sign in, you can go immediately over to the general side where you can, have sessions with, general sessions with and meetings with everybody else, and you've got a TV over there with a break room and everything, couches, and it's a lot more amenable, which of course it was. Finally, by the end of the second day, I'm like, fuck this, I'm done. I'm sorry, excuse my French. I'll sign in, just get me over there. I want to get out of this place. So as soon as I signed in, everything was great. They moved me right over to general. And that to me is a manipulation, keeping you for no reason, because I wasn't violent. I had nothing but, I was nothing but nice while I was there in the face of all this. And to keep me on the acute side for no reason other than to leverage me into signing in so they could get paid easier is, I think, a travesty. And thinking back on it, that really made me angry. At the time, I was just sick and tired of being over there with the worst of the worst cases. And I don't mean that in a bad way.
Right. But they got problems. They got real problems. You're in there.
Serious.
I got pissed off at you.
They were violent. Nobody bothered me, but it's a matter of what's going on around you. People violent, hitting things, throwing things, walking up and down a hall, screaming, cursing. And so, yeah, that really didn't set well with me, that kind of manipulation takes place. They could have just put me on the general side. They have no reason not to, in my opinion, other than what my ex-wife had said about me. Right. So anyway, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me go back and, okay. So we're talking around some circles here. So, clearly this is something that should piss everybody off. If you have a child or you have maybe a family member who's getting the opportunity to see mystical things, and then this kind of a situation could happen. I mean, this is the crossover between the criminal justice system and the psychology world. This is the area where they cross paths on a routine basis. And of course, all three of us, four of us for that matter, are routinely involved in that in a career path. And so you see this quite often, but I'm surprised that, and the deputies probably just didn't have any choice. They were just given a court order and they had to go carry it out. But in many states, we have the involuntary, situation where we can take them in for some states 72 hours, some 24 hours, just kind of depends state to state. But even the police officers do a much better evaluation of whether they're going to take their freedom and put them in a facility they don't want to be at in the first place. So this is, travesty is the least word I would use. It'd make you want to kick somebody's ass, to be honest, because here you are legitimately having experiences, and then it turns into this giant cluster, which is, unacceptable in every way. So let's kind of can we get to some of those experiences so people actually know what we're talking about here, in that this diary was stolen and then they weaponized it. So what were you seeing that was so bad? Because I'm sure the three of us are going to go, that sounds pretty normal to me. In categories, I learned how to access my Akashic records. Sure.
And I was exploring past lives, quite a few of them. I had visited with a shaman here in my hometown and talked about past lives and what I'm here to do in this life. And I went down to Ecuador for a week with a group of other life coaches, actually, and a small group. And we used ayahuasca while we were there. And I have seen, I've been face to face with apparitions in body form and in human form.
Right.
I've had clair audio experiences and a lot of clairsentience, and I think that's probably the biggest one is my clairsentience, especially through my Kundalini. I had and here's something that I think will shed light on some of this. I had a friend of mine who is or was working as an intuitive, who had done a couple of readings for me, and she was exceptionally intuitive. Out of the blue, she said to me that my ex had and this was not during a session. She just said this. My ex had an entity that was, or a spirit, a negative spirit, that was with her and that had traveled around her family. And this is what she was telling me. And that, just so I was aware of it, basically. And I wrote that in my book. And of course, when she saw that, she didn't say anything to me about it, even though I was treating her just fine. She turned this into a fear-based thing. And once she said that to everybody else, then it along with a healthy dose of fear and manipulation of the facts, it turned into
something more.
What we've been talking about. Yeah.
Right.
That was the real fire starter.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. Well, folks out there, listeners, listen, talking to a shaman, I mean, that's part of your rights, on the First Amendment, religious rights to talk to a shaman. Shamans are considered like same as priests and preachers and so on and so forth. You have every right to talk to any kind of clergy you want to, whether people agree with it or they don't agree with it, or they're all in or they're all not. It doesn't matter. In America, you're allowed to do that. So that's one thing. Taking a trip with life coaches, going to Ecuador or Peru or any of those places there, it's so common. I mean, there's regular tours that go there and legitimate organizations that do research that go, and the ayahuasca is a mix of the shamans in that area that you ingest, and it helps you potentially open up your mind to different facets of mysticism and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a short-term thing. Some people get sick even doing it and they don't do it anymore. And then, and I work in this field too. So when they say there was an entity, I get that quite a bit. And it's running around with family members. Well, in the Bible, they call that a curse. Okay, because it goes from family member to family member. So each one of these is easily shot down in the sense that they're completely legitimate expressions of a religious belief, or at least a curiosity and an exploration of other potential religious beliefs that are out there. And that there's nothing unusual about any of that. I don't see anything, but it's just from ignorance, plain old ordinary ignorance, that caused this entire thing, in my opinion, and of course vindictiveness, because I don't think she was actually really upset about this. It's just a tool, a method of the madness to jam it in you at the time. And I'm not going to get off on the whole divorce thing. That's really kind of not what we're just really kind of talking about. If you come across these things, when do you come out? When do you not come out? And how do you do it? So Kathleen, you got any insights for us on any of this?
Yeah, well, I do think that you have to be careful, because these kinds of things can happen. And this is an extreme example, but I do think in the mental health field, there's a lack of training and understanding in anything having to do with the unseen. Okay, that's, and for some who, and then when you add the bias in, and when you add the attacks in as well, where there's just pressure for people to do something that someone might be considered a dangerous self to others by someone else's testimony or something,
right?
Then that becomes a problem. And also, I think that when you have these, well, to go back to the training, I don't think there's really, we're told in the mental health field or trained to kind of acknowledge someone's spirituality or religious beliefs. But I think that when somebody has some sort of awakening experience or some kind of intense experiences, or they're seeking, they might have like you were talking about, the clairaudience or some kind of experience, in the unseen. People, a lot of mental health professionals, and certainly those in training, they don't know how to handle that. They might just kind of automatically, reflexively check the box, thinking that that's a hallucination, an auditory hallucination, or a visual hallucination, etc. That's part of their training. They're just kind of told, because remember, the field of mental health is very much worldly. It acknowledges things that you can see and touch, but not the unseen.
Absolutely. Tommy, you got, chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the current state of affairs. If you go back in earlier years, they were more open to being receptive to these concepts. But then when you have regulations and such, and control, it's changed the game. Like the work I've done with the energy psychology stuff, at first it was discounted. Now they're starting to say, oh, maybe there's some value to this. But the next step now is they're trying to regulate all of this.
Yep.
Take away from people that don't have certain degrees.
Absolutely. And energy workers from state to state now are, Reiki people and so forth are really under threat of not being able to do it. Even hypnosis in some states is highly regulated. I know in Florida, you have to have a PhD or an MD in order to do it. And that's insane. We've been doing hypnosis in the world for eons, thousands and thousands of years, in order to help people. So if Ed was accessing the Akashic records, and just so people know, the Akashic records for the listeners is just the memories of the soul in the Akash. It's a Sanskrit term, is all it really amounts to. Other people would equate that with the book of life, or you're written in the book of life from a Christian point of view. And you go back through your many different lives that you've had. Now, if you're not a believer in reincarnation, it doesn't make much sense to you, but just bide your time. 85% of the world is in agreement with reincarnation. Only in America do we get a raised eyebrow when we talk about that. So being able to access through meditation, which is biblical in and of itself, and it's also in schools now, and it's in therapies, how to meditate yourself into an understanding of life. None of this is scary. None of this is wrong. And it is just disgusting that we even have to have that. But I'm just going to say this, get to the point. I tell people when they ask me, do I come out? And I say, the way you come out is tiny little drips and drabs, little bit at a time, where the people around you, friends, family, that are there, not only do you come out, but you don't want to come out until you fully understand it yourself. If you understand it yourself and you've got reference books, manuals, training, whatever the case may be, then you have something to back you up on when you say a little something and say, here, I was reading this book and I had a similar experience to what this author and this author and this author all said, and they call it this. Oh, okay. Now whether they believe it or not, but I tell them just in drips and drabs, and over time, your inner circle gets it, and then the greater circle starts to get it. And then you get your feet under you in the sense that you really know how to say it in the right way. There's always, in the police work, we do a thing called verbal judo. And verbal judo is a way to talk to somebody to keep them from, getting in a fight with you for all practical purposes, or anybody else for that matter. A psychologist are oftentimes trained to do the same thing. So that's the way I kind of approach releasing any metaphysical experiences, or find a group that's around that, is very open for that. And they're not nuts in any way, shape, or form. In fact, some of the people I have are medical professionals. I won't tell you what kind of medical professionals, but that are around regularly. And they're religious professionals as well as other kinds of professionals. So people who have a brain know intuitively that there's more out there than what we're being told, and to experience that is not wrong. In fact, it's what you should do to expand yourself and your consciousness. So Ed, I don't know how that settles with you.
Oh, right on point. Right on point. And I should add too that I'm a Reiki practitioner, Reiki master. and that I tend to channel during Reiki sessions, and also sometimes when I'm just out and about, I channel people's pain just out of the blue, and without going deeply into that, that's what I've noticed lately. So I'm very open, I'm very connected, and I don't say no to anything. I take in all information, and I consider it. Some things are more important than others. Some things I believe more than others, but I never say something is wrong just because someone else has experienced it. And the westernized psychiatry does not see it that way. Anything in my opinion and in my experience, anything that happens in this realm is seen and directed toward mental illness.
Right. Kathleen, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And based on also what you all were talking about, that I think you do have to be mindful of your audience when, I mean, that's the reality. When you are talking about any of your experiences, you really have to be careful. And because some people might be afraid, even friends or family, they may be afraid or taken aback and not know what to think. Maybe at best they would be afraid, and others might outright attack because, you know, for whatever reason, maybe they're judgmental or they're reactive in some way. And you do potentially open yourself up to be a target. And just by virtue, when you think about the whole spiritual realm, I mean, if you are sort of, I don't know, I call it activated, you know, really activated and gaining a lot of understanding and knowledge, that might open you up to be a target. That's just the reality. And unfortunately, you were violated, and the notes you took were actually taken from you and used against you. I mean, that is an extreme case, but
Right.
even that goes to show that you even have to, I don't recommend, being in fear about it, just being smart about it and knowing who you're talking to, like you're saying, in little steps, and being aware that other people are going to have a different worldview.
I got to go to the judge too, because they spent no time looking at this. They just took this affidavit and just processed it, stamp, signed, done, just like that. It is because, from my experience, nut jobs don't keep a real thorough diary on observational notes. They just don't do that. And this is somebody who's trying to make note of experiences for their own reference. And like you said, that's the violated part. It was stolen, taken. And that is where the judge should have said, wait a minute, this is somebody's private diary. And we have no proof that any of this is anywhere close to violent or somehow detrimental to the family or anything else like that. It's observational notes, and I'm not going to, order anything in this case because there's nothing there. Because the worst part about it is, where's the due process? There was nobody, no lawyer, nobody to intervene and say, whoa, judge, hold on, this is perfectly normal. Let's get an expert on the phone and then we'll tell you that, that kind of thing. That didn't happen. And so, folks, when I said this was a modern day witch burning, that's what I think it is. In the old days, they would have Ed would be dead right now because they would have had him strapped up, either hung or crushed with stones or burned at the stake, because that's how we used to do it. And God, aren't we past that by this time? And apparently not when it gets into the criminal justice system and the untrained, unaware psychologists that work in cahoots with them. And it's really something that we all need to be quite aware of and be cautious of. And listen, if you make a first step into your family and they go, we don't believe any of that crap. Okay, good. Then don't say it again. Just keep it to yourself and deal with it in other circles that probably do understand it, are a little bit wiser, a little more open-minded. And that's where you can express some of these things. And you're going to find, once you do this, there is a number of people. I mean, I go all the way back to the Bible because, some of what I teach is, what would you have done if this had been Ezekiel or Micah one of the prophets who was hearing stuff from God, and they put it they wrote it down, and people, obviously got it. Did they need to go into a psych ward?
He would have been diagnosed as
Okay.
having a psychotic disorder by someone with a worldly view. That is
Absolutely.
definitely where we're at. And another thought I have about it is that, so if you are kind of exploring your spirituality and learning and getting, I would say, activated, that is in and of itself, it could be ungrounding, or you might have maybe destabilizing, and there is potentially a problem in getting grounded and getting your bearings. So that's a concern, because you need to find the appropriate supports to help you through this, whatever that might be, mind, body, spirit, and be able to,
Right.
and you might, many out there, your family, friends may not get it. And then once you're in the mental health, if you're in a mental health setting, like a hospital, that's when you're going to get viewed through the lens of mental illness. That's going to
Right.
happen. There's a bias.
You bet, you're right. And all four of us are life coaches.
Mhm.
All of us. And I would throw this around the circle here. I'll start with Tom, then we'll go to Ed, and then we'll come back to Kathleen. But if you had somebody coming into you for a life coaching session or 2 or 3, how would you tell them to approach this, Tom?
I would have them explore it. As long as they're not hurting themselves or others, go for it. Let's get them the resources. Let's track down what they're saying and believing. See if we can coach them along into the direction they need to go. And again, as long as there's no harm there, what's the problem with exploring?
Exactly. Ed?
Simple.
Exactly. I agree with that completely. Just to be open to things around us that we may not be able to see, and experiences that we may have that we can't necessarily explain. I think having a mentor through all of this, if a person can find a mentor, I happen to have had one during this time of my life. I call her the angel that dropped into my life just before I knew I needed one. And she was an intuitive and working in that field for about 10 years. She really backed me up. But I think, just to add to what Tom said, was to have a mentor, or at least search for one. If nothing more than just maybe an online group or something,
Kathleen,
where you can
thoughts?
safely share.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm done.
Yeah, I would help, absolutely, and help them to explore this. I mean, what a tremendous gift that is, and to be able to harness that gift, and use it, and really to more fully align mind, body, spirit, because things can happen fast. So sometimes you got to catch up and kind of recalibrate, and then have a plan moving forward. How are you going to use this to serve others, or use this in your life for good?
That's what I teach, especially when the little ones come around. But I tell their parents, when they're starting to have these mystical experiences, one, they have to learn to use this for themselves. That's number one, and be safe about it and not be scared. And then 2, they have to learn to use it for their family. What good can I do with this skill, this gift? And it's a God gift is what it is. And then ultimately for mankind, how do I use this gift to improve the world? And then I try to give them textbooks or other resources that they can go to and feel like they're part of a group. They're not the first one in the world that's ever went through this. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is an entire industry dedicated to the metaphysical. And you can start with the Bible if you knew how to read it. But there is more metaphysical interpretations of the Bible. Stephen Harefield, PhD, he did a great metaphysical interpretation of the Bible, what it really means, and it makes a whole lot more sense. Then I go to another one, which is a great book, is The Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton, PhD. Great book. And then if they're seeing things, I go to The Veil. Blake Healy, he's a minister, been able to see angels and demons since he was 3. And it's a great book. Got wife and kids and stuff. Last I knew, he was in Georgia. And so those are some things that I would recommend to people to look at first and go, okay, I'm not alone. Now, how can I reach out? Like Ed said, try to find a mentor or try to find a group that will help you go through these experiences. But if we can get to the people early, now we all are, you know, a little long in the tooth for being considered kids at this. And so we have more life skills. But can you imagine being a 3-year-old, 5-year-old and going through this and scared to even tell your mom and dad, you know, that you're having these experiences for fear they're going to throw you in the clink somewhere? That'd be crazy. Tom, you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the little kids are going to be worried about just upsetting mom or dad and getting, you know, punished, period. You know,
Yeah.
Not have to be the big send you away kind of thing, but just, you know, the timeouts in the corner because I saw something, you know, the imaginary friend, those kind of
Right.
things, you know, a lot of kids bring to the game.
Yeah, you bet. Ed, we're going to start to wrap it up here. So any final thoughts?
Yes, I in hindsight, I wish I had locked my journal up in a safe. I did not. I didn't realize she was going to be rifling through my desk, but nonetheless, just protect yourself. Think ahead, because, you know, people in your family, if they get wind of this, will start snooping. And you just assume that they will, at least. And either have it with you, or if you do, keep it, or don't write it down. You know, there are sometimes I wish I hadn't written anything down, but yeah,
There's making record that's always a challenge, because that's what everybody looks for, is the record.
Yes. And
Kathleen, sorry, go ahead, Ed. You have anything
no,
else?
no, that's all I was going to say, was just watch your back.
Yeah, sure. Work smart, as they say. Don't give them anything. Don't load the gun with bullets for somebody else. Yeah, make them find them one at a time, if at all. Kathleen, what are we supposed to say to a psychologist or psychiatrist if we run into them face to face? Kind of like you know, Tom and I are divers, so we run into the great white shark. We'll tell you how to act. So you tell us how to act if this would happen to us.
Well, it's kind of tricky because there's so many individual differences that I think it would be a situational case by case, you know, situation. I think using your discernment skills is really key, or learning to develop them, and also having good boundaries. Just learning to read other people and kind of work off the assumption that they're going to be following the medical model where they are trained to have that bias. I mean, it's part of their training, you know, to look for that. That's the lens they view things, you know, and we're trained or taught to understand the difference, but I guess just appreciate that the spirituality is, and a lot of the things that you might be experiencing are not in their textbooks. They're not trained or taught about that. So just kind of assume that they're not going to understand, and maybe go from there. Hopefully some will, and be able to be a little more open-minded about it. But that would be my general advice, and to learn to discern and to have good boundaries around who you tell what to.
Anything you just absolutely would say you don't tell your psychiatrist or psychologist in this situation like Ed would have had?
I think.
Or did he play it right? Did he play it right the way he did it?
I don't think he did anything wrong, you know,
right,
as far as, yeah, I mean, there may have, not knowing all the details, there may have been signs or red flags earlier on that maybe, Ed, you didn't catch, as far as how this could be used as a weapon against you. Okay. But in the moment, in the situation, you know, it does remind me of that Rosenhan study where, okay, here you are in the psych hospital, and they're, you know, you're going to be viewed through a particular lens. But I think that here's a general piece of advice is sometimes people who are seeking, who are, you know, really learning a lot or getting activated, they might be, you know, wildly enthusiastic about that, right? And just want to scream it off the rooftops. That is not a wise thing to do. Okay. Right. And maybe framing it within the context of, hey, a preface of, I am learning a lot about my spirituality and what I'm doing. And so that kind of hones in on the training that a lot of people get, like in terms of the mental health field, to recognize that there are, religious and spiritual differences, and to not, over pathologize that. But if you kind of frame it as that, not, I guess, in other words, within the context of you and your beliefs, not your experiences, because that's going to trigger them. If you just talk about your experiences of seeing and hearing all these things, it's going to trigger them to think it's a hallucination or something like that.
Exactly. And, since I get called to do exorcisms, I have to immediately, and oftentimes these people have not been evaluated by an MD for make sure they have sound mind and so forth, sound body, or a psychologist or psychiatrist. They haven't been evaluated, and trying to actually find one that would do a legitimate evaluation, in my experience, has been very, very challenging for those folks. And of course, if you do go, they're all scared to go because exactly what you said, they're going to be labeled with something if you show up at somebody's doorstep, and that's what they do. So I end up in a situation where I have to do a wham, bam, quick evaluation very often as to whether this person is legitimate in their sense of, is an exorcism needed? And I had one recently, and no, I don't really believe that an exorcism was needed, but I do believe perspective was needed, and some counseling was needed, and ways to address emotional issues, PTSD, that had not been addressed. And so this person was looking to blame another or another source for issues that were their own and hadn't been dealt with. But I've also had them where they created an entire different personality in the sense that they start talking differently, acting differently, the Sybil effect, that we talk about. And so I immediately slide them off to a psychologist, psychiatrist, both for proper chemical treatment as well as therapy. But in this situation, in order to do that, you have to know what's normal in the metaphysical field in order to say that's normal or it's not normal. And this is where institutions of learning, universities, where people are getting their PhDs and master's degrees in counseling and psychology and whatnot, there needs to be a course or two in this kind of stuff with people who actually know what they're talking about. And so they can go back into shamanism and, metaphysics and so forth in a way that's educational, totally clears out the ignorance, so that, and there is actually, I had my professor that taught me hypnosis. There is a formula to figure out whether somebody's schizophrenic or if they are actually having events. Clearly that wasn't exercised in this case. And I will say again, and as we close this thing out, Ed is the most normal person I've ever come across, and sophisticated, smart. He's got crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's, and continues to do that. And so it's a cautionary note for everybody. Not everybody in your circle is your best friend, and you really do, as everybody here I think is in sync. Be careful when you start to let this stuff out. And I don't think you'll have much problem if you slowly let it out and back it up with a lot of time and textbooks and so forth, mentors to help you through this process.
Yes. I'd like to add on that note that I think one piece of advice I would have is also to, as you're maybe learning to adjust and grow from these experiences, is to seek out support from non-traditional sources. Okay. Right. Until the system changes, which is not going to happen overnight, find, maybe get recommendations for someone who would be understanding, maybe a coach. Coaches don't have to rely on diagnoses at all. They don't have to use insurance, things like that. So you can bypass all of that and get help, get support to help you work through this in another way.
Right. And I know, Kathleen, you're available for that if people want to get a hold of you. And is there a particular website or email that you want to put out there so people have these problems?
Yeah, I have a brand new website that's getting launched, and it's www.drkathleentalent.com.
Okay.
And I do coaching as well as other therapy, but my coaching is very separate. And I am very committed to helping people on these issues. And I actually think that a lot of people who are in the helping professions or first responders, people who are out there on the front line, they can easily be targets for this. They tend to be, a lot of them anyway, really empathic and kind of open or increasingly open to this. And they need a lot of support sometimes, because it's easy to get burnt out, but it's also easy to become a target. And, you need to get support in working through all these things.
Exactly. Okay, very good. Well, hey, Ed, thanks for telling your story. I mean,
You're welcome, Terry.
Extremely helpful for people to listen to this. Kathleen, thanks for your input from a psychologist point of view. That's extremely helpful. And Tommy, as always,
Yeah, I appreciate you both coming on, and I think it's awesome. It's getting there. I mean, the people I've talked to in recent years, once you crack that door open to the possibility, it's amazing how many people are also keeping this quiet, and they're looking for someone that they can share this with. If you don't mind, Ed, just to kind of wrap it up for the audience, how did that end for you, that time that you had to spend at the facility and, where you're at today? How did that transition finish up?
It was a total of 8 days because they had given me a medication, which I felt no effects from, that they had to have blood work 5 days after they gave it to me. So it turned into 8 days, adding on the other days where I would not sign in. So a total of 8 days. Finally, on the 8th day, when I met in the morning with the psychiatrist, she just looked at me and she said, well, I don't have any other reason to keep you. And she said, so you're going home today. If I can have just a moment to add,
sure.
The way I got through this, when I realized that first evening that I was there, when I realized that they were going to keep me, I said, okay, first of all, I need to have a plan. And that plan was to accept where I was in the moment and accept what was happening to me, even though I disagreed with it vehemently. And even though I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, I just simply accepted it. Then from that point, I told myself I have to be kind and cooperative throughout this process, because that's the key to leaving. Anything else that's not kind and cooperative and happy will feed into their narrative. Third, and this is the part that really, I think, made a difference for me, is I said, okay, I'm here, I don't like it, but what I'm going to do is look for every possible lesson in this experience that I can find. And so every part of every day, I looked for the lessons, whether it came from physicians, staff, other people that were also in there. I just looked for the lessons. And that plan gave me, or helped me ground, basically. And as well as grounding physically throughout the week. I gave myself every morning time to cry into a towel where no one could hear me, because I knew if they heard me crying. So I would take a minute and just let all my emotion out into that towel, and then go about my day. And I think having a plan like that is what really got me through those 8 days.
Fantastic. Yeah, wiser words couldn't have been spoken. There you got it, folks. Have a plan. If you get stuck in this situation, don't fall into screaming and crying, and just try to be cooperative and get the hell out, or you're a free person again, which is incredible that this even happened in the first place. But
I want to add also on that note, sometimes, and this is where discernment comes in, sometimes less is more, and it's better to just say nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Same thing in law enforcement. Sometimes it's best to say nothing. Mm-hmm. And, we all have our own jobs, and we all have our lenses that we see through our distortion of reality, if you will. And so we had a true experience that Ed had. And for all the listeners out there, I want to thank you all for listening. take all these folks here would be great mentors for you. Every one of them will have some contact information up on the website for everybody. And for everybody else, don't stop your mystical experiences. Just moderate who you let know about it in a very safe way. And from all of us here at the Metaphysical Mysteries, we appreciate your time, and we will talk to you next time with another exciting guest. See you later. Bye-bye.